Hey everyone, welcome to Hub and Spoke, a storytelling platform produced by the J. Hurt Hub for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Davidson College. I'm your host, Liz Smith Brigham, Davidson class of 2004, and director at the Hurt Hub at Davidson. Every other week, we'll feature Davidson alumni and other members of our community who've started their own businesses, who are investing in innovation, and who are at the leading edge of solving the world's most pressing challenges. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire and connect the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs leading lives of leadership and service. Hey everyone, before we get started, here's some quick housekeeping. Please ask questions in the chat and direct them to my co-host Erin Moreau. So you all should have access to that in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We will start a Q&A session immediately after our initial conversation, roughly about halfway through today's program. We will also be sharing a recording for those of you who knew of others who perhaps weren't able to attend today. So stay tuned to our newsletter, The Hubbub, and the Hurt Hub at Davidson social media channels for details. Please do follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you have any questions or would like to follow up after this conversation, you can get in touch with Mike via email or LinkedIn, and we'll put Mike's email into the chat so that you all have that at the conclusion of today's show. So let's jump in. Let's welcome you. Let's welcome Mike Guggenheimer, Davidson class of 1996, President and CEO of Blumenthal Holdings, LLC, to Hub and Spoke. Welcome, Mike.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Great. So let's set the stage a little bit. I'm going to read your bio so everybody has some context going into our conversation. So Mike joined the Blumenthal family of businesses in 2008 and currently serves as president and CEO of Blumenthal Holdings. He oversees daily operations of its three portfolio companies: Blumenthal Brands Integrated, or BBI, Blumenthal Business Services, BBS, and RSC Biosolutions. Mike initiated the company's move into biotechnology with a 2012 investment in TerraSolve Technologies, an innovative green tech company. The RSC Biosolutions platform has developed into a global leader in performance environmental lubricants and cleaners with a unique focus on marine applications. And BBI is a globally respected specialty chemical products company, best known for the development of problem-solving products for tradesmen and DIYers under the iconic Gunk and Liquid Wrench brands, which you all might be familiar with. Prior to joining Blumenthal Holdings, Mike was an operating partner for Blackstreet Capital Management, which is a private equity group that focused on controlled buyouts of underperforming corporate orphans, which we'll touch on in our conversation as well. He also held a variety of general management positions for Milliken and Company, from manufacturing management to strategic business development. And in addition to his psychology degree from Davidson, Mike has an MBA from the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. Welcome, Mike.
Again, it's great to be here. I've been excited about this and I love what's going on with the Hurt Hub. So looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. Well, good. We have, a few questions that we've prepared. Obviously, we've had some discussions previously. I would love for you to just set the stage for us a little bit more, give some more color to your career journey from Davidson through to your current role running Blumenthal Holdings today.
Okay. When I thought about this question, you naturally start with Davidson and move from there. But I wanted to start just right before Davidson because I think it's a little bit of context of how I thought about Davidson and even my career afterwards. In high school, I had lots of sort of hands-on odd jobs, construction, landscaping. I cut grass for everybody. I delivered pizza. I sold Cutco knives. So I did a little bit of everything, and really was kind of working with my hands and was starting to get a flavor and interest in business generally from some of those things I did. So I came into Davidson, obviously appreciative of the liberal arts approach, but thinking from some general standpoint of business. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. And you mentioned psychology. I really kind of found a home in Davidson for the application of that thought with IO psychology. And we'll probably talk more about it, but even the relationship with Dr. Kello at the time has turned into a long partnership for me. But we'll probably talk about how the broadness of liberal arts has impacted me, but specific to kind of my thinking of what I wanted to do next. The IO psychology focus, as well as some of the relationships that I gleaned from that partnership, really set the stage for me. So, one of the first things was Dr. Kello helped me get this internship at Spencer's, which is up in Mount Airy, North Carolina. It was kind of an HR internship, but I really kind of traveled around the business. I rode a truck. I went through the plant, learned a lot about the company. But I started to get a feeling for, all right, manufacturing, industrial, the hands-on opportunity, when a lot of my peers were thinking about law school and medical school and other things. So when Milliken came to Davidson to recruit, I hadn't heard of Milliken, and I had people in my life, including Dr. Kello, say you really ought to, based on what you're interested in, you ought to go interview. And so I interviewed with Milliken at Davidson, and I got excited about it, reading about the company, its reputation. But a lot of people, they didn't really know what Milliken was, and Milliken didn't typically recruit at schools like Davidson. So I sort of went through that process and got an opportunity, but I had to wait. So because they have all kinds of plants everywhere. And so I actually hung around and bartended in Cornelius, of all things, for a few months, and then got an opportunity to go work for Milliken. And it was perfect. I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, because within about a year I had 25 people reporting to me on a production floor, and I was still only a year or two out of college. I was sent off to learn how to program a robot before robots were really kind of a big deal like they are now. And so really did sort of the manufacturing and product management track with Milliken. Learned a ton about myself, about building things and growing as a manager, and felt like, well, I want to learn more broadly about other parts of business. So I went to business school, thinking I probably wouldn't come back to Milliken. I think I told you the story about my division president saying, "Don't be embarrassed about working for a 165-year-old textile company when you go off to business school." And then coming out of business school, I thought, I was looking at management consulting and general management at big companies, but I really saw this opportunity to come back to Milliken and craft my role. They didn't know what to do with me, coming back. And so I said, why don't you let me help you think about how to grow the division that's been, it's a big mature company. So we created a new ventures group. I was on a bunch of kind of corporate strategy projects with McKinsey, and was able to have a nice impact. We created a little business that is still around today, that was a performance textiles business for the automotive industry. And then kind of felt like, hey, I'm in this big company, I'm having an impact, but I feel a little bit lost in this big company. And I had another mentor of mine introduce me to Blackstreet Capital and the private equity world. And it seemed to be the perfect next step to me, because in my mind, I wanted to run a business, and I had been thinking about that. And so I thought that was the path to go run a business. And while I learned a ton in my time, in private equity, when I got there, I realized it wasn't exactly what I had envisioned my kind of role would be, or my approach to running a business would be. And I wasn't there very long before I got the opportunity to come talk to the Blumenthal family and consider joining this organization here. And made the switch to come join the family, and have been here about 13 years, gradually kind of taking on more and doing more things. But really over the last few years, it's been all about sort of structuring this business for the next multiple decades. Is that there's a long history here, and we want to replicate that for many years ahead. So I think a lot of different things over my career, but not always following the predictable path, and it's worked out pretty well for me at this point.
Yeah, that's great. You and I share a background starting at 100-plus-year-old manufacturing or manufacturing related companies. McMaster Carr is where I started my career, in a place that highly recruit or has historically recruited a lot at Davidson. But to your point of maybe not the sexiest industry or the marquee name or somewhere, but certainly gave you a lot of exposure, and especially in leading teams, which we'll talk about. I had a very similar experience, 23 years old, leading a team of 15 people, so I think that's important that we want to dig into. Before we get there, I want you to, because Dr. Kello is joining us on the line today. Hi, Dr. Kello. If you could speak a little bit more specifically to how Davidson provided you that foundation, whether it was through psychology or other places. And if you wanted to speak more specifically to the IO program with Dr. Kello, that would be great as well.
I'll do both, and I'll try not to be pressured by Dr. Kello in the audience. But so I'll answer kind of the broad Davidson, how it influenced me, and then specific IO psychology, and especially Dr. Kello, who I'm very grateful for all he's done for me over the years. I think in the last one of these, we talked about Davidson preparing you how to, learn how to learn. And I really equate that to, I gave the example of learning to program a robot and at Millikan. I came into Millikan with everybody being engineers, and here am I, this psychology major. And I realized that none of the engineers knew how to do these things either. They were learning, hands-on the same way I was. So I didn't, at first was a little bit like, well, why am I not an engineer like my peers? But then I realized they don't know any more about this 6-axis robot than I do right now. And so there is that aspect. I think the other side for me of the liberal arts degree, and Davidson in particular, is this sort of acquisition of mental models that you think about things from different perspectives. You're not just coming to a situation with your sort of linear training. You're looking at it from a 360 perspective. So, whether it be, survey of Indian art or Chinese poetry or math or English or history, they're all thinking about problems or teaching you mental models that are different. And, I think that really is very powerful, throughout life, to kind of look at things in multiple angles. What from IO psychology specifically, I think what really resonated for me with those classes and Dr. Keller's classes was beginning to kind of get a sense for teamwork and how, a group of individuals can actually produce results that are greater than the sum of the parts, basically. That, I told you the story of, Dr. Keller giving us an exam that we had to take as a team. And that was kind of like wait a sec, what? I was so used to being, hard driver, individual contributor, and kind of going into that, I wasn't sure what to make of that, but then realized, wow, it is powerful when you realize you've got different perspectives, different experience, and the result is actually far beyond what you could have done on your own. And I think that's kind of an early leadership lesson that as I've grown in my career, and this scope of what I'm responsible for, it's very obvious that I can't do it all with myself, and even if I did have the training, it wouldn't make sense to. And you learn how to work with others, through others, develop teams, thinking about relationships, thinking about conflict. And I'd say now my role is probably more than 50% people related things. And so a lot of that work, just in terms of IO psychology and understanding personalities and people and teamwork, is super powerful now. The other thing about Davidson, that's something I'm kind of proud of, is that Davidson isn't shy about being a tough place. It's not, it's hard work, and but it's also a place where you have to learn how to blend work and play. And that's, the earlier you experience that and learn how to work hard when you need to work hard and play when it's time to play, the better. And I think I've seen that all through, whether it's graduate school or business, times to work hard, times to relax or recover. And I think Davidson does a really good job of balancing those things as well.
No, that's great. I again have very similar experiences. I want to touch on something that you mentioned too that I think was a challenge for me going into business school that you mentioned, right? Of Dr. Kello's class was fantastic, but perhaps anomaly insofar as, that group work or that focus on group work, whereas maybe 80 to 90% of what we do at Davidson tends to be much more individual, although I think that's probably shifting, so I don't want to speak out of school. But in going to business school, that's the flip, right? 90, maybe almost 100% of what you do is group work. So for the students in the audience who might be considering going to business school, could you talk a little bit about, that shift and that blend?
Yeah, I think obviously the schools like we're talking about, you immediately are thrust into a situation where you maybe get to choose your team, maybe your team is chosen for you, and figuring out kind of how to navigate that is really important. And I think seeking out those opportunities may be something that you do early on, as that notion that kind of the collaboration and the power of multiple perspectives is going to be really important. Um,
Well, that's great. And relative to that, sort or building on that a little bit, and we talked a lot about there's a multitude of definitions of entrepreneurship. We've heard this term intrapreneurship coming up, sort of much of your career building businesses inside of other businesses. Can you talk a little bit about that and again, what skills you're pulling on, just to illustrate for students or anybody else in the audience that there's multiple paths and it doesn't always look like building something from scratch on your own, I should say.
Yes, I think that's a great point, and it's something I would tell myself early on that I talked about wanting to run a business. I sort of didn't think I could create a business. I didn't think I could start it from scratch. So that was my thought was, well, maybe there's an opportunity in other ways. I think I appreciate creativity in a lot of different ways today than I did back then. But in my view, there are lots of different things that are entrepreneurial nature. I've had moments in my career where I thought about buying a business. That and when I kind of had that experience in private equity and thinking about the lifestyle I wanted, I came really close to buying a little plastic recycling company and looked at a CNC business and the entrepreneurship example at Milliken, being able to take an idea and create a business from scratch within a bigger company that has resources. I think a lot of the themes about entrepreneurship are similar. You can just put them in different contexts. You're trying to figure out, are you solving a problem? Is there a problem to be solved? And for whom? And kind of putting your mind to, who are you fixing it for? What are you solving for? And then, is it a big enough problem for it to be interesting, for it to matter? Can it scale or big enough to make a difference? And then, can you sustain it? Can you defend it? And so I found myself in different times in my career thinking with that lens. And I think that lens is true, whether you're launching a product within a big company or buying a little business or starting something from scratch. I think that it's unfair to look at entrepreneurship only as starting a business from scratch and like the folklore of in your garage, whatever. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and the fundamentals are pretty similar. It's just you may come at it from different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and something that we're trying to work to make sure that students, alumni, anybody that really engages with the Hurt Hub understands there's so many different paths and these skill sets. Again, whether you're thinking about a for-profit entity, a nonprofit entity, building a business inside a business, building something from your dorm room, they're widely applicable. And I think kind of going back to what you mentioned on Davidson of work ethic and critical thinking and problem solving skills, those are fairly universal in building businesses. So I really appreciate that point. I want to dig in a little bit more into private equity and your time there. I was struck, by the line in your bio that talked about control buyouts for underperforming corporate orphans. That's a big phrase.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us a little bit and your experience there?
Yeah. So private equity is a really broad umbrella of investing in, existing businesses. It could be early stage venture capital. It could be, a turnaround. It could be, there's lots of different types of investments. Blackstreet's focus was on kind of looking for things that maybe had been neglected, so to speak. Maybe they were a business unit within a big company, a brand that didn't fit, or a business division that didn't fit. So it wasn't quite turnarounds, but it had a kind of an aspect of that it was underperforming in the sense that it hadn't been given the resource or the attention that it needed. And that's something I think I have always enjoyed thinking about how to fix things. And so I think I liked the idea working with Blackstreet of, hey, here's a great business that just could be much better with a little TLC. But I think, private equity is a great place to find sort of entrepreneurial opportunities because it can mean lots of different things. For me, that experience was really an important pivot point in two ways. One, I had been with this large private company for many years, well resourced. A lot of the investment decisions were, well, what's the payback? When we're going to invest some money, how many years before that there's a return on that investment? Going into private equity and into the types of businesses they invested in, I was immediately faced with kind of cash flow and balance sheet and, who are we paying this week and how do we, it gave me an appreciation of, that I didn't have before in terms of running a business. And I think going back to all the different ways you could do it, if you're starting something in your garage or you bought a business or you're creative, these fundamentals are the same. But for me, I kind of got a really aggressive crash course in that in the role that I was in. But another thing, I mentioned it before, for me, I think what I realized in that role was I was looking for something that was kind of an autonomy or a freedom or a lifestyle type of approach. I realized in that point in my career, it wasn't just that I wanted to run a business, so to speak, that it was really more of the impact I wanted to be able to have and the freedom to create that I wanted to have. And in that scenario, there were a lot of different players. You got the investor, you've got the CEO that was actually reporting to me. So it was kind of messy for me, at least at that point in my career. I think, a lot of the operating partners come in later in their career than I did. So I'm really blessed to have had that chance at that point in my career. But I also appreciate kind of what I have now, which is, a much more intimate relationship with the owners that I work with and a really close kind of value connection with what we're trying to do with the business and what they want to do. And I think, you and I talked about it as just sort of the passion or kind of follow sort of what what gets you excited and where you really feel like you can have some energy behind it. And that may, a maturity or a point in my career, that moment in private equity was great for me. One, for what it taught me from just running a business standpoint, but what it also taught me about what I was really looking for, kind of internally from my work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of things that you pointed out there. One, the stakeholder management and the relationship element that really is pervasive, regardless of what industry you're working in, size of business, et cetera. And I'm not sure that that's something that's always talked about, and so I want to pivot or kind of leading into more of the question around teams that you've built and led and cultivated those teams. Like, where have been some of your biggest successes? And perhaps, for some of us Davidson folks who are more reticent to fail or maybe more reticent to take on some of those risks, where are some failures perhaps where you've learned?
Oh, okay. So let's maybe start with the failure question, and then I'll come back and address the point about sort of some insights about teams and team development. I mean, I think that I've learned as much from the mistakes I've made or the failures that I think that's where some of the greatest leaps forward have been for me. Um, and we've dealt, I think all of us, but the business too, has dealt with a lot of interesting challenges over the last kind of couple of years. Um, I think a couple of things that sort of top of mind that were challenges or important moments for me that I learned from. Uh, One, over the last few years, we've really gotten the business more focused. And there's two stories to tell about deciding to exit manufacturing. But the first story is we really made a decision that we can't be everything, and we needed to focus on building brands and research and development and innovation. And we made a decision to exit manufacturing and decided to go exit to contract packagers and warehouses. And um, it was very complex. We did a lot of things at once, and we knew there was some uncertainty, some potential, hurdles and roadblocks along the way. And we hit a big one in that the outside warehouses that we had lined up could not do what we were doing before. The contract packagers could, but the warehouse, we deal with retailers, we deal with industrial customers, we deal with hundreds of products. And it was really, really a big challenge. And I think there was the first reaction was to say, "Oh man, what we made a big mistake here." And then, I think it immediately comes to you got to live in the present and deal with the here and now. And this is where the team comes into play, is where you you recognize, hey, we went into this knowing it wasn't going to be easy. We knew there was some risk, and now we have to adjust. And so we brought everything, the warehousing, all back here to Charlotte, and we're able to do it in maybe a third the time that it took the other warehouse to even set up. We had people that we had to let go that were eager to come back and work for us. And it was a real lesson in a team rallying around a challenge and trusting a team, but also to put that mistake or that issue behind us and say we can't worry about that now. We just have to deal with what's in front of us. Um, the other thing that I think came up as a tough sort of moment that was a lesson for me in you know sort of the humane aspects of running a business was having to close the plant the first time, and that decision that we made, that was a very difficult decision, but the right decision strategically. I will never forget the day I had to stand in front of all those people and talk about why we were doing it. It still gets to me a little bit inside when I even tell the story. But we had dealt with everything so transparently, so honestly, with a lot of gratitude. That day, I spent the day walking around talking to everybody, and everybody came up to me thanking me and thanking us and thanking the Blumenthal family. And it was a real kind of eye opener about how important it is sort of to treat people a certain way and be really transparent about why you're doing things. And I think, your question about building teams and maybe even tying it back to Davidson a little bit is, I think there's a really close knit aspect to Davidson, at Davidson and beyond. I can call a Davidson grad tomorrow that doesn't know who I am from Adam, and they will take my call and offer to help. But that idea of sort of being honest and treating people with respect, um, I think that's really essential to building teams and leading teams. And it sometimes means having to kind of deliver some difficult news, but in a way that is kind of true to you know you know uh, what's happening, and not being trying to brush it under the rug.
Yeah, I think, and I share that experience with you too. I worked for a startup that unfortunately ran out of funding, and we had to lay off all of our staff, right before the holidays without severance and all these things. And those types of moments of anything, I think stand out in your career, my career, as that pivotal time. Did you treat that person with respect? How is this communicated? How open? And then, how willing were you to help them network and find that next role. And when you had this opportunity to bring the warehousing back to Charlotte, I think you had mentioned, those are some of the first people you called, right? And to kind of bring them back there. So I do think that's something that maybe not always gets highlighted in how challenging that is, but how important it is in codifying your role as a leader and how you want to present, and how Davidson ultimately sets you up for that type of empathy and empathetic leadership.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind as we're kind of talking about this is just the long view versus the short view. And I've been fortunate to be in private companies, mostly family held, and some of that long view is really kind of natural for those types of businesses. But I think there are a lot of times where the long view is harder, but it if you really can stick to it, it's like being able to bring people back. And some of that, when you take the long view, a lot of times you go through these patches where you sacrifice something in the short term, where you've made some difficult decision. And I think even the way Davidson looks at the world is very much a long view. The preparation for not just the job that you're going to get the day you graduate or the next move. It's for all the next moves, and that's a real big lesson for me, is just really being having that fortitude to keep that long view in mind, and how you deal with people, how you deal with your partners, how you look at the business. It's critical.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even if you don't necessarily, it's not the same organization, I've had situations where, somebody I studied abroad with sat on my advisory board at Morningstar, and I was working there, and 16 years have gone by, or 18 years or whatever it was, and we haven't spoken to one another, but that connection is still there. Or, you exit one company, and as you're building your network over time, you never know 5, 10, 15 years down the road, they might be a client of yours, they might be a partner of yours, an investor of yours. And so it is the never burn a bridge. I know it sounds cliche, but it is, perhaps the positive antithesis of that is, just be open to cultivating those networks over time, and especially the Davidson networks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. I know we're right about at the midway point of our conversation. I just want to remind everyone to please do send in your questions to Aaron, and we'll be taking those. I had a question that came in via email ahead of our conversation, and really more, I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I would like to offer it to you again. Is how do you think someone coming out of a liberal arts educational experience can help redefine what it means to be an entrepreneur or an innovator?
Yeah, I think you said we touched on it. I mean, I think maybe refusing to accept maybe the conventional definition of entrepreneurism. I think that there are so many different shapes and sizes. I think for a Davidson student or for anybody, it is um, I think of it as solving a problem. I think of it as sort of innovation, but in a very kind of hands-on, self-built way, and that can come in a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be a tech company, as your blurb has talked about before. And so I think that you know there's the liberal arts program, but Davidson in particular, there's this kind of innate curiosity and exploration of different things that comes out of that. So I think entrepreneurship can be about the curiosity to solve a problem and the curiosity to kind of create something. The other thing that I think is interesting about entrepreneurship is you kind of get yourself in this tunnel where you are looking at a problem or looking at an issue. And I think that you used the word open a minute ago. The openness to accept things that you may not be expecting can be really powerful. That you may think you have an idea, or you've sort of formulated this business plan, and you start asking questions and you start getting down to the fundamentals, and then this other door opens up, or this other you see this other thing much more clearly. I think that's a way to use your word, redefine entrepreneurship. It isn't necessarily this linear walk. It can be, you get in the tunnel and you solve problems. We're I'll give you an example for we're dealing with right now is we responded last year to customers asking us for cleaners and disinfectants and you know what do I use? We're known for performance. The bio business is known for safety and environmental stewardship. So we had a lot of people saying, what do I use to clean? What do I use to disinfect? So we started rallying around that and introduced some technology. Well, two steps down the road, we've developed our own electrostatic sprayer for these technologies. It was never in our mind to begin with. It just came from let's help. Let's figure out what we can do here, but let's be open and saw an opportunity. So I think the curiosity, the openness, the not necessarily assuming that there's some prescription to how to do it or where the best place is to do it. It can come from anywhere.
No, I think that's important. And I was speaking with a student a couple days ago in my office hours, and one thing that we talked about is her ability to put seemingly disparate things together in some sort of new configuration relative to, oh, the market's changed, or COVID happened, or these situations have changed. And she felt very well prepared, and in fact was saying that's one of my unique differentiators as I'm going into job interviews, is really coming from Davidson with that perspective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and that's the whole mental, like multiple mental models.
Yeah.
Looking at things from the 360. If you are just an engineer or just a environmental specialist, or you're a finance person, or you're going to look at it through that lens. You've got a hammer and everything's a nail, versus if you have been trained to in a lot of different areas, maybe it's an inch, a mile wide and an inch deep, but you have an awareness of lots of different ways to approach problems. That ability to put the pieces together differently or quickly, I think is super powerful in entrepreneurship, because you're immediately in you. How are you going to, you've got all these functions to deal with, but if you are not tied to one lens, you're going to see things, how the pieces fit together more quickly, I think.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Dr. Kello has joined us in the chat here, so he has a couple questions for you. So the first question, can you talk some more about the importance of networking, working with mentors, staying connected with people who can help you, and vice versa? And then I'll get to the second question in a moment.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give Dr. Kello, again, I mentioned my gratitude to him. I think that he was really one of my first significant mentors. And as I mentioned earlier, he's been a partner for me over the years in different ways. So, obviously at Davidson, he played a really important role in helping, me get the Spencer's internship, think about Milliken, trading notes about how this fits with what I like to do. That even came up in with George and Dean 2 weeks ago, creating there's a lot of advocacy for students at Davidson, but in the case of Dr. Kello and mentors, that relationship carries on. Stay in touch, and if you have somebody in your life that understands what you're trying to do and kind of is a sounding board for you, it is really kind of a powerful thing. He talked about sort of the networking and how things may turn into something down the road. I think that identifying people at different stages of my life where either there's something I can offer or somebody that can sees it can challenge me or push me or kind of give me a perspective I don't have. It's really important. And so I think, I don't, there was a second part of your question maybe about mentorship.
The second part is slightly different. It's more about the sort of the culture of Blumenthal Holdings and what do you do to build and sustain it. So if you want to wrap up, commentary on mentorship or pull that into the culture at Blumenthal, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, just to wrap up on mentorship, I guess, is, I think that one of the big lessons for me over the years has been just kind of the self-reflection, you know, especially as if you're an entrepreneur or you're running something small. There are a lot of times you run out of places to kind of get help. If you're by yourself, there's not a lot of people to talk to. If you're the boss, sometimes there's not a lot of people to talk to, or you're in a pivot point in your career. So really being clear to sort of identify who are those people that will challenge you, that will be good sounding boards, I think is essential. Um, and then, the question about culture at Blumenthal Holdings, it really is something that is so essential. I look at it less kind of culture, sort of broadly, but more specifically, what are the operating principles that we're going to kind of hold dear, and I use that not only to think about the team that we want to have and build, and I mentioned before how much of my time is spent kind of thinking about people and team, but it's also about kind of making sense of what we're doing, talking about things like experimentation or comfort, with failure, or thinking like an owner, or, bias for action. And, we have these kind of operating principles and kind of values that we think about, but rather than just something you kind of post on the board, it's more of like, right, this is what we're doing, and this is what, it's not just, it's how we differentiate. It's tied to our strategy. I talked about sort of changing the way we kind of are structured. Well, we're structured to move quicker, and so we have to have a bias for action. We have to be comfortable with experimentation, and so there's a connectedness that says, all right, I get what we're doing strategically. These operating principles make sense to me, and it also becomes really powerful in terms of kind of talent management and acquiring talent. I actually still interview everybody that we hire. We actually just hired a bunch of people in the marine business, some of them international. And our VP of talent and I were actually the ones that screened everybody. And it was like, oh, okay, the CEO is interviewing me. But it's I can do that because of our size, but I also feel like of all the things that I do, it's as important as anything. And I want it to be our advantage because we're small enough and flat enough that I can do that. But, getting the right talent, getting them excited about what we're doing, helping people get sort of in the right seat on the bus is really important. Even that, we're talking about psychology and talking about IO psychology, that notion of fit. A lot of times when I interview people, I'll tell them all the bad stuff. Like I'll tell them that, this is going to be hard. If you don't like to do this, you probably don't want to be here. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point being like fit and really kind of making sure that this is what you want, and this is going to sort of, you're going to thrive. And we want to develop people and have them really feel like it's what they signed up for. So, understanding all those things are critical to that.
Yeah, I want to just touch on one thing that you mentioned there, because I do see this as a lesson that I think I had to learn once I was already out in the working world. And that is having, as an employee, as an individual, having agency to definitively make that choice to join an organization, and not just be so overwhelmed like, oh, the CEO wants me here, and I can be a chameleon and fit myself into the mold of this company, but that there's a definitive, an analysis, a choice, that self-reflection on what do I really value, and is that a match with this particular organization. So I do think that's worth kind of highlighting, because I think I've seen a lot of students get sort of caught up in, I need a job, but know that might not be final, but it's also important for you to make that choice.
I agree. I think, me living in Cornelius for 4 or 6 months as a bartender, knowing I had other things, I had other offers. It wasn't just because I knew what I wanted to do and I knew what I didn't want to do, or at least I felt like this is how I should start. And I'm patient. I was willing to kind of take the long view on that. But I think that is a great point, is really, you know, the the active choice of, is this a fit for me? And but it doesn't have to be the perfect fit forever. It's, are you going to be
Sure.
able to learn and grow? And, again, it may open another door down the road, but, you know, really being conscious of, is this a fit for what I want to do?
That's great. We had another question come in through the chat from Andrew Irvine this time. How do you define innovation in your organization today, and how are you building that muscle within your respective teams?
That's a great question. I think as a small business, relatively, innovation has to be embedded in everything that we do. We can't just say, all right, this is the team that's going to work on innovation and everybody else is working on the day to day. And so I talked about the operating principles and values. We try to sort of embed innovative thinking, solving problems, even the way we talk about our company and our email is solve with B. And we try to think about everybody being empowered to find solutions to problems or have a bias for action. And even this is similar to, not all entrepreneurship is the same. Innovation doesn't always have to be the amazing, huge idea that saves the world. There can be little bits of innovation that add up. So I think, fostering the question about fostering it and building it in the company. Some of it is cultural, some of it's how you think about things. The other thing you said earlier about being okay with failure, I think over time, we've really had to think about how we talk about, objectives and goals and how we, sort of manage performance. Because if you're constantly sort of punishing, for lack of a better word, failures, then people are going to be really risk averse and people are not going to try things. And so, you have to find this balance of really understanding risk and encouraging, trying things and maybe even celebrating things that didn't work, because you tried something, and having people be like, oh yeah, so that felt good. I didn't just get, you know, embarrassed because that project didn't work. That's another important thing. And the last thing I would say for our business, it's been really defining where we want to play and how we think we're going to win. And for us, it's more about differentiation. But if you have a clear understanding of what we can do differently and where we can win, then it's a little easier to think about, does this idea or innovative concept sort of fit with what we're trying to do? And then it's a matter of saying, well, what do you need? Or how do we mitigate or manage the risk?
Yeah, I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more specifically on that too, of how you are communicating your strategy to everybody and ensuring that people understand that clearly, such that they feel empowered to take action, without maybe being explicitly told what to do, right?
Yes. There's not an easy answer to that, because basically I'm constantly trying to do that. And if Dr. Kello's mic was unmuted, he would tell me that I can't possibly over communicate on these types of issues. But it starts with really kind of defining an aspiration for what are we trying to do as a business. And that is, we try to define it again in the problem we're solving for an individual. It's not, for us, it's not, we're just going to make great chemical products or sustainable products. It's for what industry or for what individual. So people understand that. And we try to put it on one page, with this, where are you going to play and how are you going to win? We have this one page document that pretty much shows people and shows ourselves, all right, this is kind of true north of where we're trying to take the business, and these are the main things we need to do. But as it cascades down into organization, people have to have the freedom to figure out, what does it mean in my group? What does it mean for, the finance team or the marketing group? And that's kind of the way I try to approach it, is really kind of reiterate big picture. This is what we're trying to be and why, because we're good at these things and other people can't do these things. And to try to simplify it. And then again, my point about Kello is just keep talking about it. The pandemic has created new forums for me to talk to people. I would do big town halls and stand in front of a room, a lot of walking around and talking to people, which is a great place to kind of for people to get a sense for what does it mean for them. But it's morphed this year into more small team Zoom meetings. I just had a meeting this morning where it was kind of a ask me anything with a our finance and IT group, and that's the more I do that, the more people will say, hey, yeah, why are we doing this, or help me understand that. And the storytelling, to use your word here, is where a lot of that comes out.
That's interesting too, that you have more freedom. In some ways, it seems anathema to think about COVID insofar as more freedom, but with I think also for just Hub and Spoke in particular, right? This has given us more freedom to have many more alumni, participate and engage in these stories because we're not hampered by geography or taking somebody away from their family for a number of days or the cost or any of that. So I agree with you. It's opened up a lot of new channels. Probably have time for maybe a couple more questions. One has come in from Catherine McKenzie, and she asks, how important has the history or legacy of the companies you've worked for been, and how do you look back to move forward? How do you chart corporate milestones to tell the narrative of those companies? She's an archivist, as she put it. And how has looking back moved you forward?
That's a great question. And I think so. As you were reading that question, one thought came to my mind that's not exactly related to answering that question, which is, some of this past and some of the businesses that I chose to work for, or to use the word used earlier, not the most glamorous or not the most. And so I think turning that history and maybe these quote legacy businesses into source of pride versus, well, it's not the most glamorous company when you look at, I think there's a lot of pride and history that we leverage. I think, whether it's Milliken or the Blumenthal family, there's such a strong reputation of doing business the right way for many years, building brands that people respect. And so we try to morph that story into kind of the acceptance or respect of the great history, but also the recognition that we can't be the same company we were 90 years ago, 90 years from now. So I think that's the challenge, but it's also an opportunity to kind of leverage the history, leverage the legacy as a way to have some pride and recognition of what we have done and do really well, but also say we can't be too tied to that either, because the world is changing so fast that we certainly don't look like what we looked like 20, 30 years ago, and I bet we don't look very much like what we look today in 10 or 20 years from now. But it's really a source of pride for me personally to work for both a family that has the reputation it has, but brands and businesses that have such a deep history. I think we could do better at it too, but it's a great question.
Kind of related to that, and we talked about this a little bit in preparing for our conversation, is students, I think today, obviously there's a range of opportunities coming through our Center for Career Development. A lot of those are sort of marquee names, brands, companies that have been around for a long time, and it's very clear what their value systems are. It's very clear on how to evaluate those. But for students who are interested in maybe going to a startup or a smaller company or something that doesn't necessarily have that marquee name, how would you advise them on evaluating the strength of the company, the background, whether or not, again, going back to our conversation of fit, that it's really going to be a good place for them to start their careers?
Yeah, I think that for me, at least, it's kind of getting to the fundamentals. And do you understand the business? If you ask questions and try to learn that are you really understanding fundamentally how the business works and what they're trying to do with it? And are the whether it's a company you're evaluating or a business that you may go work for, if the people you're talking to can articulate that very well and gives you a sort of a foundational understanding of what they're trying to do. I think that's important. Um, I think that, we talked about where you get excited and where your passion is. Sometimes as you ask those questions, you're going to start to see, man, I really, I can see what they're doing here. I understand it. Um, you know, I tend to shy away from things, whether it's an investment or a project that I can't understand at sort of foundational, like first principles type of level. And I think that's something that can come out of an evaluation. A lot of the principles of a business, like I talked about, how are you trying to win and where are you trying to play, uh, can come out of a pretty short conversation, I think.
That's great. Well, we are coming right up to our closing here. One final thing I want to give you the last word in our conversation. We're trying to really build this highly engaged community of entrepreneurs and innovators, whether they're Davidson alums or friends of the college or students, faculty, our coworkers here at the Hurt Hub, et cetera. What's one sort of ask or challenge you might have of this community as we're building that out?
Oh, um, well, I think you've kind of hit on something. You and I have talked a little bit about the notion of not being, you know, embarrassed isn't the right word, but don't be afraid to go down a path that isn't necessarily the predictable or expected path. A lot of times, I have I haven't necessarily followed the herd in a lot of my steps along the way. So that's one thing is don't feel necessarily the pull to follow maybe the herd or the conventional wisdom. And as individuals, follow your curiosity, follow your interests. Um, Emphasize places where you feel like you can really learn and grow, and that will be something that pays off. In terms of the development of the Hurt Hub, I mean, I think there are so many people. The Davidson network is so eager to help out anybody in Davidson. So if you're a student, if you're trying to get involved, don't be afraid to ask, or engage with the alumni base. I know from my little Davidson circle here that people would be all over helping any way they can. And I personally just, I was excited about this simply from the aspect of being able to give back and kind of, I've had a lot of help along the way, and I feel like a lot of it is just sort of paying it forward in your career. So, there are plenty of people that would love to help, and in little ways or big ways. So, you know, ask for it.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. In that vein, I have a couple of sort of opportunities for those who are on the phone, especially students, but also young alums, that I'll just highlight insofar as us paying it forward, as well as helping to educate the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators. So one, just a reminder for everybody, we do have the Lean Startup class coming next Wednesday. That is free for Davidson students, faculty, and staff. And that'll be a 7-week program on Wednesday evenings. That'll really give you the basics and the foundation for a lot of what Mike alluded to today, thinking about your audience. What are you building for? What's your value proposition or your unique differentiation? So I highly encourage you to check that out. Also, for any students or alumni that have graduated in the last, from 2015 to 2020, the applications for Venture Fund are now open. So if you have a big idea, you want to pitch for potentially up to $25,000 of investment, I highly encourage you all to check out that on our website and take a look at Venture Fund. And then to save the date, we're going to continue Hub and Spoke in the next couple of weeks with Cameron Hardesty. So she's Davidson class of '07. She's a Techstars alumna as well. She is the CEO and founder of Poppy Flowers. So please do save the date. If you've registered with us for this series, you should have it already on your calendar. So that makes it pretty easy. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us, and to you especially, Mike, and for all of your willingness to help those moving forward as well.
Thank you, Liz. I enjoyed it.
All right, take care. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.